There is a specific sound that defined the childhood of the world's most relentless achievers, and it wasn't the sound of a notification. It was the sound of silence. If you were born in the late 70s or early 80s, you grew up in a world that was, by modern standards, agonizingly slow. Before smartphones, before social media, before we outsourced our attention spans to an algorithm. You lived in the era where dopamine on demand was non-existent. In the 80s, if you were bored, you stayed bored. You sat with it. You kicked a ball against a wall for 4 hours because there was literally nothing else to do. But that boredom wasn't a waste of time. It was high-intensity interval training for the human brain. While the world waited for the digital revolution, a small group of kids was accidentally building a mental operating system that could tolerate repetition, endure frustration, and thrive without external validation. Today, we see the results in names like Cristiano Ronaldo, LeBron James, and Novak Djokovic. They weren't just born gifted, they were forged in a specific slice of history that refused to let them be average. To understand why the class of the 80s still dominates the world today, we have to look at the environment that wired their brains. Modern psychology often discusses the concept of delayed gratification. You've probably heard of the famous marshmallow test, the idea that a child's ability to wait for a second marshmallow is the greatest predictor of future success. Well, the 80s was a decade-long marshmallow test. If you wanted to hear your favorite song, you waited by the radio for 3 hours with a cassette tape ready. If you missed your favorite TV show, it was gone, forever, or at least until the summer reruns. You couldn't Google an answer. You had to ride your bike to a library, search through physical files, or ask someone who might know. This environment did something profound to the prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain responsible for executive function, focus, and impulse control. When you grow up without constant, instant stimulation, your brain learns to generate its own. This is where the capacity for deep work is born. Neuroscientists have found that deep focus builds myelin, a fatty tissue that insulates your neurons and allows signals to travel faster. When Cristiano Ronaldo was a young boy in Madeira or Novak Djokovic was hitting tennis balls in an empty swimming pool in Belgrade, they weren't looking for likes or instant feedback. They were building layers of myelin through the sheer, repetitive, and often lonely nature of their practice. The average attention span is shrinking today, but greatness is rarely new. Greatness is the same fundamental movement repeated 10,000 times until it becomes subconscious. The 80s generation has a biological advantage here. Their brains were wired to handle the plateau. They don't need a dopamine hit every 5 seconds to keep going. They can sit in the silence of the grind because that is exactly where they were raised. They learned to find progress in the invisible margins. Take Cristiano Ronaldo, born in 1985. Most people look at Ronaldo and see a winner, but his identity was never actually built on winning. Winning is just the byproduct. His identity was built on self-engineering. Ronaldo entered the professional world right as the 80s analog grit met the 90s digital precision. He is the ultimate bilinguist of performance. He has the 80s work ethic, the first one in, last one out mentality, but he applied it with a level of systematic obsession the world had never seen before. Early in his career at Manchester United, he wasn't just practicing, he was studying the physics of the ball's flight. He was one of the first athletes to treat his body like a high-performance laboratory. But here is the psychological key. His identity is based on improving, not being. Most athletes, once they reach the top, try to protect their status. They become conservative. They stop taking risks because they are afraid to lose what they have. Ronaldo did the opposite. Every year he re-engineered his entire system, his diet, his sleep patterns, his recovery, and even his playing style. His 80s childhood taught him that nothing is given and everything can be fixed. In the 80s, if your toy broke, you repaired it. If you wanted to get better, you worked. There were no hacks. He refused to be average because, in his world, average meant being forgotten in the analog shadows. Then we have LeBron James. Born in 1984, we are currently witnessing something that shouldn't be biologically possible. A man in his third decade of elite performance, still competing at an all-NBA level. People point to the millions of dollars he spends on his body, but the money isn't the secret. The secret is the psychological discipline of time. LeBron thinks in decades, not seasons. This is a very 80s trait. Before the internet accelerated our perception of reality, we understood that meaningful things took time to build. Building a career was like building a brick house. You laid one brick at a time, and you didn't check the progress every 5 minutes. LeBron's longevity is a refusal to let his mental standard drop. He was the chosen one on national magazine covers before he could even legally drive. A dopamine-addicted brain, raised in the era of instant fame, would have cracked under that pressure or burned out after the first championship. But LeBron has a tolerance for the repetitive. He has followed the same warm-up, the same recovery, and the same film study protocols for over 20 years. That is not just talent. That is tolerance for monotony. The 80s built minds that didn't get bored of being great. While the rest of the world is looking for the next big thing, LeBron stays focused on the current big thing. The next game, the next rep, the next recovery session. Longevity is simply psychological discipline layered over time. Finally, consider Novak Djokovic. Born in 1987, right at the end of this transformative era. If Ronaldo is the system and LeBron is the architecture, Djokovic is the mental fortress. His childhood in war-torn Belgrade wasn't just analog, it was a lesson in survival. Practicing in a drained swimming pool while NATO planes flew overhead creates a hyper-adaptation to stress that cannot be replicated in a comfortable environment. From a neuroplasticity perspective, this wires the brain to categorize pressure differently. When you see Djokovic in a fifth-set tiebreak, with 20,000 people screaming against him, he looks calm, almost bored. This is because his nervous system has been trained to find safety in discomfort. To a mind that survived the 80s and 90s in the Balkans, a tennis match, no matter how high the stakes, is not a threat. It's a game. He uses a concept called cognitive reappraisal, taking the negative energy of a hostile crowd and rewiring it in real time to fuel his own focus. His brain has literally mapped discomfort as a safe zone through thousands of hours of repetition, the kind of repetition only an 80s raised kid could endure. He has built a nervous system that refuses to break. He isn't playing against his opponent. He is playing against the very concept of being average. The thread that connects these three isn't just their birth years, it's the tolerance for discomfort. The 80s didn't create talent. The world has always had talent. The 80s created tolerance. Tolerance for repetition without an immediate reward. Tolerance for boredom without a glowing screen to escape into. Tolerance for failure without a digital audience to offer comfort. Ronaldo, LeBron, and Djokovic are the last of the Mohicans. They are the last generation to reach adulthood before the world became hyper-connected and hyper-distracted. They possess a bilingualism of the mind. They use modern technology to optimize their performance, but they don't rely on it for their motivation. They have the self-reliance of Gen X because their parents didn't helicopter them. They solved their own problems on the playground and dealt with the consequences. But they also have the ambition of the digital age. They are independent and cooperative. Doubtful, yet optimistic. Digital, but analog. They remember the world before the internet, which means they know that reality exists outside the screen. We often look at these legends and call them freaks of nature because it makes us feel better about our own choices. It's an excuse to stay average. But you can't change your birth certificate. You can only change your mental operating system. The real question is, can you train your mind to tolerate what they tolerated? Can you put your phone in another room and work for 3 hours on one single task? Can you handle the boring, unglamorous parts of your career without needing a like or a pat on the back? Can you build a system that relies on discipline instead of feeling motivated? Because greatness is not explosive. It is not a viral clip or a lucky break. Greatness is repeated. It is the boring, analog, 1980s style grind performed with 2026 style precision. The 80s didn't just build athletes, they built minds that refused to be average. And that refusal is the only thing standing between where you are and where you want to be. Greatness isn't a flash of light. It's the ability to stay in the dark until the work is done. It's the realization that you don't need a faster world. You need a stronger mind.